get the message and live a better life. Live a better life. He got the call and he ran out of here so fast. He never does that in the morning. Right away, I called his mother. I said, Angel, she's called Angelique, but I call her Angel. Something must have happened. I said, Samuel jumped up. He didn't take his shower. He got out of here so fast.
Racing to the Marathon, Hussle's store, the place where he had been shot multiple times.
He walked out of his own store in his own neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon. No security, no fear. Because why would he need any of that here? This was Crenshaw. This was home. At 2:52 in the afternoon, Nipsey Hussle sent out what would be his very last message to the world. He tweeted, "Having strong enemies is a blessing." Nobody knew it then. But within minutes, those words would become a prophecy. And the man who ended his life? It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a rival from another city. It was somebody Nipsey had just done something kind for. Just minutes before the shooting. That is what makes this story so hard to sit with. Welcome to Unseen Stories. I'm glad you're here today. Because what we're about to get into is one of those stories that stays with you. Not just because of what happened, but because of who it happened to, and because of everything that was lost when it did. Today we are talking about Ermias Joseph Asghedom. The world knew him as Nipsey Hussle. And if you are from Los Angeles, if you are from any hood in America, if you ever had a dream that felt too big for where you came from, then you already know why this one hit different. This was a man who went back, who bought back, who built something real in the same streets that tried to swallow him whole. And on March 31st, 2019, he was taken from us in the most painful way possible. By someone he knew, in the place he loved most, on an ordinary Sunday afternoon. We are going to walk through this entire story today. From the beginning, from Crenshaw, from a young boy with a microphone and a dream, all the way to that parking lot, the investigation, the courtroom, and the legacy that refuses to die. And we are going to do it with the respect this story deserves. So let's start from the very beginning. Ermias Joseph Asghedom was born on August 15, 1985, in the Crenshaw district of South Los Angeles. His mother, Angelique Smith, was African American. His father, Dawit Asghedom, had immigrated from Eritrea, a small country in the Horn of Africa. And from the very beginning, Ermias carried both of those worlds inside of him. The American streets of Crenshaw, and the African roots of his father's homeland. His parents separated when he was young. But here is something people don't always talk about. Both of them stayed present. Both of them stayed in the same neighborhood. So Ermias grew up with his mother, his younger sister Samantha, and his older brother, the one he would later call Black Sam. And his father was never far away. That matters. Because in a community where absent fathers have become almost expected, Dawit Asghedom showed up. He even took Ermias and his brother back to Eritrea for a 3-month visit when Ermias was a teenager. And that trip, we will get to what that trip did to his mindset. But just hold that for now. From as early as 6 years old, Ermias was already deep in music. His favorite group was Criss Cross. He was memorizing lyrics before most kids his age were even thinking about what they wanted to be. And in his mind, it was already decided. He was going to make music. He was going to sign a record deal. And he was going to do it young. He said it himself. I thought I was going to be like a young artist's son. When I was a little kid, I guess when I was probably 8, 9, my goal was that by the time I'm 12, 13, I'll be signed and cracking. That was the dream. And it was real to him. Not wishful thinking. Not fantasy. He was already writing rhymes. Already studying the craft. Already seeing himself there. But life in Crenshaw had other plans. At least, for a while. His older brother Sam was one of the biggest influences in his early life. He watched Sam move through the neighborhood with a certain kind of energy. A certain kind of hustle. And Ermias absorbed all of it. By the 6th grade he had his first job, shining shoes at a shop on Slauson Avenue. And listen to this. Some days he was making close to $100. As a 6th grader. And rather than spend it, he saved it. He stacked it. He said that first job taught him how to manage money. How to be disciplined with what he earned. At an age when most kids don't even have a concept of financial responsibility. He was also selling candy on the side. Mowing lawns. Finding any and every way to generate income. But underneath all of that, the music never went away. A friend who lived across the street from him had the only computer on the block. And Ermias used the money he had saved to buy himself a microphone. At just 11 years old, he recorded his very first song, over a Snoop Dogg instrumental, in somebody's house, with a second-hand mic, and that was enough. That was the beginning. His mother Angelique saw what was happening. She saw how serious he was, and she enrolled him in a program that took kids into actual music studios and taught them how to use the equipment. Because of that, Ermias started learning audio engineering, beat production, the technical side of music, not just the performance, the craft. His beats started getting attention in the neighborhood. Friends were coming to him for production. For the first time, the dream had a foundation under it. But the equipment was expensive, way beyond what he could afford at 13 years old. And that gap, that space between the dream and the resources to chase it, that is where the street stepped in. He joined the Rolling 60s Crips, the dominant gang in the Crenshaw area. And I want us to sit with that for a second. Not to judge it, but to understand it. Because it is easy to look back now from a distance and ask why. Why would someone with that much talent, that much drive, that much self-awareness, go that route? But the question itself shows how far removed some of us are from what that environment actually felt like from the inside. He wasn't making a reckless decision. He was making a survival decision. He needed resources. He needed community. He needed protection. And in Crenshaw in the late 90s, the Rolling 60s offered all three. That is not an excuse. That is context. And context is everything if we actually want to understand this story. What came with gang life was what always comes with it. Drug dealing, fights, dangerous situations on the street. A world where the stakes were permanent and the margin for error was zero. But even in that world, Ermias held on to something. Bigger picture. And knowing that this was not going to be his forever. He dropped out of high school in 10th grade. His mother, understandably, did not take that well. She changed the locks, told him he needed to find somewhere else to stay. He moved around the corner to his grandmother's house. And rather than break him, it focused him. Being unsupervised meant he could be on the block all day, could be in the streets fully. But it also meant he could work on music all night. And that duality, the streets and the studio, became the tension that would eventually produce one of the most authentic voices in West Coast hip-hop. By around 15, he started rapping under the name Concept. He formed a group with some friends, including a guy named Brian who you might know as Kid Ink. Their group was called Stranded Minds. They pooled together enough equipment to set up a makeshift recording studio at their friend Rimpau's house. And that is where the grind truly started. Then came the name. A friend of his, a guy they called Baby Gooch, watched how effortlessly Ermias moved, how natural the hustle was in him. And one day he came back with a name, Nipsey Hussle, a nod to Nipsey Russell, a poet and comedian from the 1950s, with a slight twist to make it his own. And from that moment on, the name fit like it was always supposed to be his. Now here is something important to understand about Nipsey Hussle the man, not just the artist. Even as his music career was building, even as the name was starting to spread through Crenshaw and beyond, he was still in the streets, still navigating that world. He wasn't performing a persona. He was living it. And that authenticity is part of what made people trust him, what made them listen, what made them eventually follow his lead when he started preaching a different way. In 2003, he dropped his first mixtape, titled The Middleman. He sold it out of the trunk of his car in the neighborhood, performed at small parties on the block, hustled every single copy by hand, and something was shifting in him during this time. When he was 18, his family took that trip to Eritrea, his father's homeland, and what he saw there changed him. He saw real poverty, and it recalibrated everything. He came back to Crenshaw and looked at what he had with different eyes. Even the struggle looked different, because at least here, there was a chance. At least here, the resources existed if you were willing to fight for them. And then something happened that pushed him even further. He was involved in a street incident that was caught on camera. Nipsey was never identified in the footage, but some of his close friends were. And he watched those friends receive sentences that took years from their lives. He looked at that, really looked at it, and he made a decision. He said, I just was taking care of myself early on. I always wanted to do music. That was my first passion before anything. He sold his white Lincoln to a friend. He and his brother Black Sam went half on building their own recording studio. And from that point on, there was no looking back. The streets were always going to be part of where he came from. but they were no longer going to be the destination. In early 2005, Nipsey filed the paperwork to start his own record label. He called it Slaws and Boys, his own label, his own terms, at 19 years old, with his own money. In December of that same year, he released his mixtape Slaws and Boys Volume 1. He printed copies and handed them to everyone he knew. His pitch to people was direct and unforgettable. If it's whack, throw it out the window. That was his sales pitch. Standing on Crenshaw and Slauson, in front of the Master Burger, putting his music directly in people's hands and daring them to dismiss it. And people listened, because there was something in the voice, something in the honesty of it, something that felt like it came from a real place. His local buzz started to build. Small at first, but consistent. And then a friend of his named Big U took notice. Big U saw the work Nipsey was putting in and offered to manage him. That turned out to be one of the most important moves of the early career. Because Big U had connections. Real ones. One of those connections was a man named Steve Lobel, who heard the Slaws and Boys mixtape and immediately wanted in. Now Nipsey had two managers in his corner, both of them pushing his vision like it was their own. And in 2006, he got his first taste of the mainstream. He was featured on a song for Tupac's posthumous album Pac's Life. For a kid from Crenshaw who grew up idolizing that era of West Coast rap, that had to feel like confirmation. Like the universe saying, you are on the right path. But the road was never going to be straight. It never is. Later that year, his brother's house was raided by law enforcement. All of their recording equipment was confiscated. And Nipsey himself faced legal trouble over a firearm that was found during the raid. He had to go back to the streets to generate money for legal representation. The studio, the momentum, temporarily gone. But here is who Nipsey was. He had already been recording music before the raid. He compiled what he had into a demo tape. And one day out on the block, the rapper The Game pulled up to a red light. Nipsey walked up to that car and put his demo tape in The Game's hand. And The Game called him that same night. Because what he heard was undeniable. He wasn't just making music. He was making moves. Every setback became a setup for the next step forward. And then came another major break. A film director cast him in a Bone Thugs-n-Harmony movie. On set, he crossed paths with a man named Johnny Shipes, who ran a label under Sony and Epic Records. And Shipes was one of the very few people in the industry at that time willing to take a chance on an artist who was openly affiliated with a gang. Shipes said it himself. He's a real street dude. I don't know if you're gonna wanna. He's in the mix out there. So I looked him up and he had like one song on there. This song called Bullets Ain't Got No Name. And I was like, yo, this is incredible. That song became the title of his first mixtape under the label. Bullets Ain't Got No Name dropped in April of 2008. And it got his foot properly in the door of the industry. West Coast legends like Snoop Dogg and The Game started co-signing his movement, collaborating with him, putting their credibility behind his name. How many people do you know who got knocked down as many times as Nipsey did in those early years, and kept getting back up without losing the vision? Legal trouble, equipment confiscated, setbacks that would have ended most people's careers before they even started. But every single time, Nipsey found a way forward. Not just emotionally, practically, strategically. In 2010, Epic Records went through budget cuts. Instead of dropping him, they offered him his own label imprint. That became All Money in Records. And that same year, he was featured on the XXL Freshman list, alongside J. Cole, Big Sean, alongside artists who would go on to define a generation of hip-hop. But here is where Nipsey started to separate himself from everyone else in the conversation. Not just in music, in business. He opened a fat burger restaurant, a cell phone shop, a hair salon, all in his neighborhood, all on Slauson, all intentionally placed in the community that raised him. He wasn't just making money, he was circulating money, keeping it local, creating jobs for people who looked like him, who came from where he came from, who needed exactly the kind of opportunity he was creating. And in 2013, he did something that the entire music industry called crazy. He announced a new mixtape called Crenshaw, and he said he would only press 1,000 copies, and each copy would cost $100. $100 for a mixtape. The backlash was immediate. People said he had lost his mind, said he was arrogant, said it would never work. 1 month later, he opened a pop-up shop in Los Angeles, and every single copy sold that same night. Jay-Z himself showed up and bought 100 copies. Because Jay-Z recognized what Nipsey was doing. This wasn't just a music release. It was a statement about value, about self-worth, about refusing to give away your work just because the industry expected you to. And that project became the first of his to chart on the Billboard 100. By 2017, Nipsey Hussle was operating on a completely different level. Not just as a rapper, as a developer, as a community architect. He opened more businesses on Slauson, a seafood market, the World on Wheels roller rink, and he officially reopened the Marathon clothing store. But even that wasn't the move that made people stop and truly pay attention. In 2017, Nipsey purchased the entire plaza, the whole strip mall on the corner of Slauson Avenue and Crenshaw Boulevard. He bought the building, the same building he used to hustle in front of, the same parking lot where he used to stand and push mixtapes from the trunk of his car. He now owned it, every square foot of it. He said it himself. This is the same plaza I used to hustle by, and now we bought the building. Read that back slowly. The same plaza he used to hustle by, and now he owned it. That is not just a success story. That is a message to every kid in Crenshaw, to every kid in any neighborhood in America where people are told that the ceiling is low. Nipsey was showing them with his life that the ceiling is only as low as you allow it to be. His plans for that plaza went further than just ownership. He wanted to turn it into a mixed-use residential and commercial space, a hub, a center of economic activity for the neighborhood. He was bringing a STEM education center called Vector 90 to the space, a co-working facility, a place where young people from South LA could learn technology and entrepreneurship. He wasn't waiting for someone else to build that for his community. He was building it himself. He reportedly invested approximately $2.5 million of his own money into that plaza. And then came Victory Lap, almost 15 years after his very first mixtape. After every setback, every confiscated studio, every false start, every time the industry tried to put a ceiling on him. In February of 2018, Nipsey Hussle released his official debut studio album. He called it Victory Lap. And that title was not accidental. That was him looking back at everything he had survived and saying, I made it, on my terms, with my integrity intact. Victory Lap debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200. It sold 53,000 copies in its first week. 2 singles from the album went gold, giving him his first ever plaques to hang on a wall. And the album earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Rap Album of the Year. A Grammy nomination for his debut album. After 15 years of grinding independently, he had partnerships with Puma. He was investing in tech startups. He was being mentioned in conversations about the most successful entrepreneurs in the country, not just in hip-hop, in business broadly. And beyond all of that, he was scheduled to meet with the Los Angeles Police Department Commissioner the very next day after March 31, 2019. He had requested the meeting himself, to discuss strategies for reducing gang violence in South LA, to talk about how law enforcement and community leaders could work together to protect young people. He was building those bridges. Actively, quietly. That meeting never happened. Now let's talk about Eric Holder. Because to understand what happened on March 31st, you have to understand who Eric Holder was. And more importantly, you have to understand the world that both of these men came from. Because they came from the same one. Eric Holder Jr. was 29 years old at the time of the shooting. He grew up in the same neighborhood as Nipsey. Same streets, same culture. He was also a member of the Rolling 60s Crips. Meaning these two men had a shared history, a shared community, a shared set of codes that governed how they moved through the world. Holder had dreams of becoming a rapper too. He went by the names Fly Mac or Shitty Cuz on the street. And reportedly at some point, he had been connected to Nipsey's label. But that connection had not produced the results he wanted. His career had not taken off. And by early 2019, Eric Holder was unemployed, directionless, and carrying something heavy inside of him. Something unresolved. He also had a criminal record. In 2009, he faced charges related to a domestic dispute and completed an anger management program. In 2012, he was convicted of carrying a loaded firearm and served approximately 6 months, which meant that legally, he was prohibited from possessing a firearm from that point forward. A restriction he clearly did not honor. His rap lyrics, which prosecutors would later point to during trial, spoke of violence, body bags, and dangerous street life. His defense team would later allude to struggles with mental health and personal loss as context for his state of mind. But no formal mental health defense was ever pursued. The judge ruled that his history in that regard was not relevant to what happened in that parking lot. And there was one more piece of context that circulated publicly. A street commentator named Whack 100 in an interview on Vlad TV made a claim that many people took note of. He said, "Them same two dudes that just had a fight a week prior. Shitty Cuz and Nipsey Hussle got into a fight. They had a fight a week prior to that." This was not confirmed by the prosecution or the official investigation, but it was reported. And if true, it adds a layer of existing tension to what we know about the relationship between these two men in the days before March 31st. Whatever was between them, it was not nothing. There was history. There was friction. And on a Sunday afternoon, all of it came to a head. March 31st, 2019. A Sunday. Nipsey woke up that morning with a simple intention. One of his friends, a man named Kerry Lathan, had recently been released from prison after serving more than 2 decades. Nipsey had already sent him a care package after his release. But on this particular Sunday, he wanted to do more. He went to the Marathon store to meet Lathan personally, to give him clothes, to give him whatever else he might need as he tried to rebuild his life on the outside. That is the kind of man Nipsey was. Not just generous with money, but with his time, with his presence, with his attention. He arrived at the store in the early afternoon, parked his car without security, because in Crenshaw, on Slauson, in front of his own store, he never felt like he needed it. This was his neighborhood. These were his people. He had walked these streets his whole life. He stepped out into the parking lot and immediately, it became what it always became when Nipsey showed up anywhere in South LA. People gathered. Fans came up for photos. Friends stopped to talk. Autographs were signed. He was relaxed, in his element, standing outside in the afternoon sun, doing what he always did when he was here. At 2:52 in the afternoon, he sent out that tweet. "Having strong enemies is a blessing." And then he put the phone down and went back to being present with his people. At approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a white 2016 Chevy Cruze pulled into the parking lot adjacent to the Marathon store. Behind the wheel was a woman named Brianita Nicholson. She was 35 years old. She worked as a driver for a ride-sharing company. She and Eric Holder had been seeing each other casually for a few weeks. They had met when she picked him up as a passenger in her car one day. On this Sunday, they had been driving through South Los Angeles looking for somewhere to eat. Holder wanted food from the Master Burger restaurant in the strip mall, so she pulled in. As soon as she made the turn into the parking lot, she saw him, Nipsey Hussle, standing outside his store, and she was excited. She later testified about that moment. She told Holder, "There is Nipsey Hussle right there." She said he was fine. She wanted a picture with him. And according to her testimony, Holder did not respond. He gave no indication of whether he even knew who Nipsey was. Holder got out of the car. He was shirtless. The Rolling 60s tattoo inscribed across his stomach visible for anyone who looked. He went into the Master Burger and placed his order. Then he came back outside, and he walked over to where Nipsey was standing with his friends. Herman Douglas, who went by the name Cowboy, was there. He worked for Nipsey and his brother in various capacities around the strip mall. He had been standing in that parking lot with Nipsey for about 30 minutes already. And there was another man there named Evan McKenzie, known as Rimpow, an artist who had appeared on some of Nipsey's music. When Holder walked up, Nipsey spotted him and asked, "Is that Shitty?" Nobody had seen Shitty in a while. According to Douglas's testimony, that is just how the greeting went. Like running into someone you used to know. Low-key, normal. Holder came over and shook everybody's hands. And then the conversation shifted. According to witnesses, Nipsey brought something up. Something that needed to be said. Word had been circulating on the street that Eric Holder had been cooperating with law enforcement. In the world these men came from, that kind of accusation carries consequences that can follow a man everywhere he goes. It can cost him his standing, his safety, his reputation. And Nipsey, according to his friend Cowboy Douglas, was not bringing it up to threaten Holder. He was bringing it up as a heads up, as someone who still had some regard for this man. He said something to the effect of, I haven't seen the paperwork myself, but they're saying you got some paperwork out on you. You need to take care of that. That was the message. Not an accusation. Not a confrontation. A warning. From someone who could have said nothing at all. Cowboy Douglas confirmed it later. He said Nipsey's tone was not loud. Not aggressive. It was calm. Like one man talking to another man about something that concerned him. Like someone who still cared enough to say something rather than let it sit. Holder's response was defensive. According to Brianita Nicholson, who had by this point gotten out of the car and come over to meet Nipsey herself, Holder asked something like, "Have you ever snitched?" The conversation lasted only a few minutes, and from the outside, it did not look like it was escalating, because in the middle of it, Nipsey actually stopped and took a photo with Brianita. She had asked him for a picture. He obliged, smiled, posed, the way he always did with people who approached him with love. If Nipsey had felt genuinely threatened in that moment, he would not have stopped to take a picture. After the photo, Holder went back inside Master Burger to pick up his food. He came back out, went over to Nipsey briefly one more time. They spoke for a short moment. Then Holder came back to the car, got in, and asked Brianita if he could borrow a few dollars because he didn't have enough to cover his order. She gave it to him. He went back in, came out with his chili cheese fries. At that point, everything looked like it was done, like the interaction had ended, like Holder was going to eat his food and move on. Brianita drove them out of the parking lot. What happened next, inside that car, as they drove around the block, is what Brianita Nicholson later described in detail to a grand jury. As she drove, Holder reached into his waistband. He pulled out a firearm, and he began loading bullets into the magazine. Right there, in the passenger seat, while she was driving. She looked at him and she said, "You are not going to do a drive-by in my car." And Holder put the gun away. Now stop right there. Because that moment right there tells you everything about the premeditation behind what happened next. He came to that parking lot with a weapon. He had a conversation with Nipsey. He left. And the very next thing he did when they drove away was reach for that gun. Not later. Not after some long deliberation. Immediately. The decision had already been made before he ever walked up to shake Nipsey's hand. Brianita testified that she had no idea he intended to harm Nipsey until she saw that gun. She thought maybe they had an argument. But she said she could not have predicted what he was about to do. Holder told her to pull over. Said he needed to eat. She pulled into the parking lot adjacent to the strip mall. He took a few bites of his food. Then he put it down. He got out of the car carrying not one but two firearms. A 9mm and a revolver. He put on a red shirt. He told Brianita to wait. Said he would be right back. Then he walked north, through the alley, back toward the parking lot where Nipsey was still standing with his friends. What happened in that parking lot over the next 60 seconds was captured on multiple surveillance cameras. And the footage left nothing open to interpretation. Eric Holder walked up to the group. According to survivor Kerry Lathan, as Holder approached, he said, "You're through." Then he opened fire. At close range, using both weapons. He fired repeatedly, targeting Nipsey directly. In total, Nipsey was struck by gunfire multiple times across his head, his torso, his abdomen, and his extremities. Kerry Lathan was struck in the back by a bullet that caused severe and permanent damage to his spine. Lathan's nephew Shermy Villanueva, who had come to the store that day simply to buy some clothes and happened to run into Nipsey, was also hit. His injuries were serious, but he was able to speak with investigators relatively quickly after receiving treatment. The gunfire sent everyone in the area running. People scattering in every direction. Chaos in a parking lot that had been peaceful and warm just moments before. And then Holder did something that no one who watched that footage ever forgot. After Nipsey was already on the ground, already critically wounded, Holder walked back over to him and kicked him in the head before running away. Then he came back a second time and fired at Nipsey again while he was on the ground. Then retreated once more through the alley toward where Brianita was waiting. That detail, that kick, that return to fire again. That was what prosecutors would come back to throughout the entire trial. Because it demonstrated something beyond a moment of rage. It demonstrated intent. It demonstrated a personal investment in making sure the job was done. Kerry Lathan, shot and on the ground himself, heard something in those moments. He heard Nipsey's voice. Nipsey said, "You got me." 2 words. In the middle of everything. With everything his body was going through. He said 2 words that told everyone around him exactly what he already understood about what had just happened. You got me. And Shermy Villanueva told investigators that he also heard Nipsey's voice in those moments. He said Nipsey was saying, "He shot me. He shot me." And Villanueva said that Nipsey was in complete shock. That he was fighting. That he was trying to move, trying to get up, even as his body was failing him. Nipsey's friend Cowboy Douglas had gone inside the store to eat his lunch just before the shooting. When he heard the shots, he came outside. He saw a man running toward the alley. He knew immediately who it was. He went to Nipsey. He tried to help. He tried to apply pressure to a wound near Nipsey's arm to slow the bleeding. He stayed right there with him. Nipsey's brother Samuel was at his grandmother's house when he got the call. He got in his car and drove over immediately. He arrived to find his brother on the ground. He stayed right there. The Los Angeles Fire Department paramedics administered aid to Nipsey and the other victims. He was rushed to California Hospital Medical Center. His injuries were catastrophic. He had been struck by gunfire at least 10 times. Bullets had pierced his lungs in multiple places. A bullet had entered his abdomen, passed through his liver, and severed his spinal cord. He had lost a devastating amount of blood internally. By the time paramedics reached him, the medical reality was beyond critical. At 3:55 in the afternoon, 33-year-old Ermias Joseph Asghedom was pronounced dead. 35 minutes after the shooting, Kerry Lathan survived, but the damage to his spine left him paralyzed and wheelchair-bound. Shermy Villanueva survived. His wound was serious but stable. And Brianita Nicholson, she was sitting in that parking lot waiting. She heard the shots. She saw people running. And when Eric Holder came back to the car, running, still carrying both weapons, she asked him what had happened. He told her to drive. Said if she didn't drive, he would slap her. She drove. She was frightened, confused, trying to process what she had just heard and what she was now seeing. She drove west toward the 405 freeway. Holder told her to turn on some music, and neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive. She dropped him at his cousin's house in another part of the city. Then she drove to her mother's house where she lived. And that evening, as she was on social media, she started seeing the reports. She started seeing the name Eric Holder. She started seeing the description of the getaway vehicle. Her vehicle, her license plate, on the news, on every screen. And that is when everything became real. That same evening, the city of Los Angeles was already grieving. Within hours of the shooting, hundreds of people had descended on the Marathon clothing store. Candles, flowers, photographs, people standing in the same parking lot where it happened, crying, playing his music, holding each other. Because that is what Nipsey meant to that community. You did not need to know him personally to feel the loss personally. But as night fell, the grief turned into something else. The crowd grew. And then a disturbance broke out. Someone in the crowd drew a weapon. People saw it. And hundreds of mourners scattered in every direction. There was a stampede. Shoes and candles left behind on the ground. People falling. Police in riot gear moved in. Fights broke out amid the confusion. At least 19 people were injured. 2 women were shot. One of them told police she had been knocked to the ground in the stampede and only realized she had been hit when someone pointed it out to her. She drove herself to the hospital. On the same night that the city was trying to come together to mourn one of its most beloved sons, gun violence showed up again. Right there. In the same parking lot. And if that does not tell you something about the depth of the problem Nipsey spent his life trying to address, I do not know what will. While the community was grieving, law enforcement was already moving. Within hours of the shooting, surveillance camera footage from the strip mall had been obtained and reviewed. The footage was clear. The shooter's face was visible. His approach, the shooting, the return, the kick, all of it captured from multiple angles. Investigators also had the description of the getaway vehicle almost immediately. A white 2016 Chevy Cruze. And a license plate number. By the morning of April 1st, the Los Angeles Police Department had identified their suspect. Los Angeles Police Chief Michael Moore made a direct public appeal. He said, "Mr. Holder, who I am confident is watching this, I ask him to surrender." And then Chief Moore described what the video evidence showed. He said, Mr. Holder walked up on more than one occasion and engaged in a conversation with Nipsey and the others that were there. He left and then came back and subsequently came back armed with a handgun and purposely and repeatedly fired. That press conference also disclosed the license plate of the getaway vehicle publicly. Brianita Nicholson was watching the news that night when the report named Eric Holder as the suspect and described her car as the getaway vehicle. She said her heart sank, and she made a decision. On the morning of April 2nd, Brianita Nicholson drove herself to the LAPD. She walked into the station. She told the officer at the desk that her car had been involved in the shooting, that she had information, and the officer at the desk turned her away, told her not to listen to the news. A key witness in one of the most high-profile cases in Los Angeles history walked into a police station to come forward voluntarily, and the officer she encountered sent her home. That failure prompted an internal investigation, but Brianita did not give up. She came back. She met with detectives once they realized who she was, and she sat down for a 5-hour interview. She told them everything, every detail of that day. The drive through South LA, the parking lot, the gun being loaded in the car, the drive away, being told to put on music and stay quiet. All of it. In exchange for her full cooperation with the investigation, she was granted immunity from prosecution. Now, Brianita Nicholson has been a complicated figure in public conversation since this case became known. Some people felt she knew more than she let on. Some people felt she was complicit simply by being there. And I understand why people feel that way. She was in that car. She saw the gun being loaded. She drove away without asking questions. She even helped him find a place to stay the following night. But here is the other side of that. She was also a woman in a car with a man who had just used 2 firearms to shoot multiple people, who told her directly that he would physically harm her if she did not do what he said. Fear is real. And the line between what we would do in theory and what we actually do when we are sitting next to that kind of danger is not always as clear as it looks from the outside. What we do know is that she eventually came forward. She gave investigators the information that helped build the case. And the prosecution made the decision to grant her immunity based on the value of what she provided. Meanwhile, Eric Holder was on the run. After Brianita dropped him at his cousin's house the night of the shooting, he called her later that evening and asked if he could come stay with her. She said no. But she agreed to help him find a motel room the following morning because she was afraid and did not know what else to do. She used her own identification to book him a room at a Motel 6 because his ID had expired. She left him there and went to work. And on April 2nd, a tip came in. A caller reported seeing Eric Holder in the city of Bellflower, California, approximately 15 miles southeast of Crenshaw. Holder had reportedly attempted to check himself into a mental health facility in Bellflower, but someone inside that facility recognized him from the news coverage and called 911. Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies responded and located Holder outside the facility. He was taken into custody. The LAPD confirmed his identity and he was transferred to their custody that same afternoon. The 2-day manhunt was over. Eric Holder was held on $7 million bail. He was placed in protective custody for his own safety, because law enforcement was well aware that what he had done made him a significant target behind bars. On April 4th, just days after his arrest, Holder appeared in court for the first time. He was formally charged with 1 count of first-degree murder for the killing of Nipsey Hussle, 2 counts of attempted murder for the shootings of Kerry Lathan and Shermy Villanueva, 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of being a felon in possession of a firearm. His first attorney was Christopher Darden, a name many people recognized immediately. Darden had been one of the prosecutors in the O.J. Simpson trial back in 1995, and in much of the Black American community, that name carried a weight that had never fully lifted. To many people, Darden representing the man who killed Nipsey Hussle was an insult layered on top of an open wound. The response was severe. Threats began arriving at Darden's office. Phone calls, messages on social media, threatening his life, threatening his family. And on May 10th, the day after Holder was formally indicted by a grand jury, Darden withdrew from the case. He posted a statement that read in part, "After centuries of a history of black men hung from trees without trial, or after thousands of cases of black men tried, convicted and executed without counsel, after Gideon versus Wainwright and Powell versus Alabama, I cannot understand why in 2019 some people would deny a black man his Sixth Amendment right to counsel of his choice, or why defending such a man should invite threats not only against me but against my children too. The right to counsel is not only a constitutional right, it is a civil right as well. Now, whatever you think about Christopher Darden and his history, whatever feelings his name brings up, that statement raises a real question, one that the black community has wrestled with for a long time. Does every person, regardless of what they are accused of, deserve a legal defense? The Constitution says yes. And the history of black men being denied that right, being convicted without counsel, is real and documented and painful. So how do we hold both of those truths at the same time? How do we honor the right to a defense while also holding space for the grief and anger of a community that just lost someone irreplaceable? There is no easy answer, but it is a question worth sitting with. Holder's case then moved to a new attorney named Aaron Jansen. Holder pleaded not guilty to all charges, and what followed was more than 2 years of delays. The global pandemic shut down court proceedings across the country. Then the judge presiding over the case retired and had to be replaced. Then in May of 2021, Holder refused to leave his cell on the day of a scheduled hearing, causing yet another postponement. The community waited. Nipsey's family waited. Kerry Lathan, in his wheelchair, waited. The city waited. The trial finally began in June of 2022, nearly 3.5 years after the shooting. Prosecutors laid out their case clearly. They argued that Eric Holder had made a deliberate, calculated decision to return to that parking lot and kill Nipsey Hussle after feeling personally disrespected by the conversation about being labeled an informant. That he left, armed himself with 2 weapons, changed his shirt, told his companion to wait, and walked back through that alley with full knowledge of what he was about to do. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Shell casings from 2 different firearms recovered at the scene. Bullets consistent with both a 9mm and a revolver. Surveillance footage from multiple cameras showing Holder approaching, firing, retreating, returning, firing again, and delivering that kick to a man who was already on the ground. Brianita Nicholson testified. She described the entire sequence of events in detail. Herman "Cowboy" Douglas testified. He described the conversation in the parking lot. He confirmed that Nipsey's tone when he brought up the rumors was calm, not confrontational. He said Nipsey was looking out for Holder, not attacking him. He described watching Nipsey in those final moments after the shooting. He was visibly emotional on that stand, because this was not just a case to him. This was his friend. Kerry Lathan testified. He described hearing Holder say the words, "You're through," just before the shooting started. He described what he heard Nipsey say in those final moments. The medical examiner testified that Nipsey sustained 10 gunshot wounds, that the injuries to his head, chest, and abdomen were catastrophically fatal, that by the time first responders arrived, the combination of damage to his vital organs and the volume of internal blood loss made survival virtually impossible regardless of how quickly medical help came. The defense's argument was that this was not first-degree murder, that it was a crime of passion, that Holder had been humiliated in front of people by the conversation about snitching, that the emotional provocation reduced the legal culpability. They were pushing for a manslaughter conviction rather than murder. But the prosecution came back hard on that, because the video told a completely different story. A man acting purely in the heat of the moment does not walk away, get in a car, start loading a gun, get talked out of a drive-by, pull over, eat a few bites of food, put on a different shirt, and then walk back through an alley to do what he came back to do. That sequence of events demonstrated deliberation, planning, decision-making. The jury agreed. In July of 2022, after deliberating on the evidence, the jury found Eric Holder Jr. guilty of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted voluntary manslaughter for the injuries to Kerry Lathan and Shermy Villanueva, and the firearm charges. In February of 2023, Eric Holder Jr. was sentenced 25 years to life for the murder of Nipsey Hussle, 25 additional years for the firearm enhancement, 10 years for the attempted manslaughter convictions, 60 years to life in total. At the sentencing hearing, Herman "Cowboy" Douglas stood up and delivered a statement about what Nipsey meant, about what the community lost, about the void that could not be filled. He spoke from the heart of someone who had been there that day, who had held his friend on the ground, who had lived with that image ever since. Eric Holder sat through all of it expressionless. He offered no statement, no acknowledgement of what he had done, no words for Nipsey's children, for Lauren London, for the community, nothing. 60 years to life, and silence. Now let's talk about what happened to the people left behind. Kerry Lathan, the man Nipsey had gone to that store specifically to help on that Sunday afternoon. The man whose release from prison had been the reason Nipsey was even there that day. Kerry Lathan was shot and left permanently paralyzed. He is now confined to a wheelchair. He carries the physical consequences of that day with him every single morning he wakes up. Think about the weight of that. A man who had just come home after more than 2 decades, who received a care package from Nipsey, who came to the store that day for clothes and some company, and he will spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair because of what Eric Holder chose to do. Lauren London, Nipsey's partner, the mother of his son Cross, she has spoken publicly about the grief that came after, about how March is still the hardest month for her every single year, about how she has not moved on, because some things you do not move on from. You move forward. But moving forward does not mean the wound closes. She became an ambassador for Puma, continuing the partnership that Nipsey had established before his death. Puma released a co-branded marathon clothing collection after his passing, with proceeds supporting the neighborhood foundation Nipsey had started. She has also become an advocate for trauma healing in the community, channeling the grief into purpose, the way he would have wanted. Nipsey's brother Samuel took over operations for the Marathon clothing store and the broader business interests. He pushed forward with the plans Nipsey had for the plaza. In 2021, it was announced that the property would be developed into what is being called Nipsey Hussle Tower, a mixed-use community development. The vision Nipsey had for that space, the one he talked about before any of this happened, is still being built. His brother is making sure of that. The Los Angeles City Council renamed the intersection of Crenshaw Boulevard and West Slauson Avenue in his honor. It is now officially Nipsey Hussle Square. A petition from the community gathered over 500,000 signatures overnight before the dedication was formalized. By early 2020, the signs were up. His name is now literally part of the city's infrastructure. More than 50 murals of Nipsey were painted across Los Angeles within the first month after his death. Artists honoring him with walls, with color, with images of him smiling, watching over the city he loved. On April 11, 2019, a celebration of life was held at the Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles. More than 21,000 people attended. Free tickets were gone within minutes of being released. His family spoke. Lauren London spoke. Snoop Dogg spoke at length about mentoring Nipsey and watching him become a mentor to others. He called him a peace advocate. A letter from former President Barack Obama was read aloud. Obama praised his community work and noted that his own daughters were fans of his music. Stevie Wonder performed. And then came the procession. 25.5 miles long. The approximate distance of a marathon. The convoy wound through the streets of South Los Angeles. Past his childhood home. Past the STEM Center. Past the Marathon store on Slauson one final time. Tens of thousands of people flooded the streets. People stood on rooftops and balconies across Watts, Inglewood, Compton, and South LA. Low riders tilted on hydraulics. Bikes did wheelies down Vermont Avenue. Eritrean flags waved alongside blue bandanas. Crips and Bloods stood side by side. Police officers stood alongside community members. Celebrities stood alongside everyday people from the neighborhood. 25.5 miles. Through the city. For a man who spent his entire life running his own marathon. In 2020, the Recording Academy included Nipsey in the In Memoriam segment at the Grammy Awards. The rap performances that night were dedicated to him. He was posthumously awarded 2 Grammy Awards for a debut album that took 15 years to make. LeBron James wore his shirt during warm-ups. The phrase, "The Marathon Continues," appeared on scoreboards at Los Angeles sports games. Athletes, artists, politicians, and community leaders came together in a way that Nipsey had always believed was possible. That unity was his message the whole time. He just had to leave before he could see it fully realized. Before we close today, I want to say something directly, because this story is not just a story about a crime. It is a story about something much deeper than that. And if we walk away from it without sitting with what it teaches us, then we have not done right by the man we spent this time talking about. Nipsey Hussle once said, "If they kill me, I want people to ride for me the right way. In unity." He said that before any of this happened, as if he already understood something about the cost of being who he was in the place he was in. And when they did take him from us, the world responded exactly the way he asked. In unity, Crips and Bloods marching together, communities that had been divided for generations standing in the same street for the same man. But here is the lesson I want us to carry out of here today. It should not take a funeral to produce that kind of unity. It should not take a 25-mile procession for us to stand next to each other. Nipsey was trying to build that unity while he was alive. He was having meetings with law enforcement. He was investing in STEM centers. He was creating jobs. He was buying back the block. He was doing all of that while breathing. And we need to find a way to honor that energy while the people around us are still here to see it. The second lesson is this. Eric Holder was not from somewhere else. He was from the same neighborhood, the same community. He had the same dreams. And somewhere along the way, something went so deeply wrong inside of him that he looked at a man who had just given him a respectful heads up, a man who owed him nothing, and decided that his own wounded pride was worth more than that man's life. That is what unaddressed pain does. That is what happens when a person has no tools to process humiliation except through destruction. And that is not an excuse for what Eric Holder did. He made a choice. He made several choices that day, each one more deliberate than the last. And he will spend the next 60 years in a cell with those choices. But the question we have to ask ourselves as a community is, how many people are walking around right now carrying that level of unresolved pain? That level of disconnection from the value of human life? And what are we doing about it while they are still in the parking lot, before they go back to the car? That was Nipsey's question. That was what he was working on every single day. And the marathon continues because that question has not been answered yet. Ermias Joseph Asghedom, born August 15, 1985, in Crenshaw, to a mother who enrolled him in music programs and a father who took him back to Africa to show him his roots. He shined shoes in 6th grade and saved every dollar. He bought a microphone at 11 years old and recorded his first song over a Snoop Dogg instrumental. He dropped out of high school, found his way through the streets, found his way back out, built a label with his own money, sold mixtapes from the trunk of his car, charged $100 for 1,000 copies and sold every single one, bought the building he used to hustle in front of, nominated for a Grammy on his debut album after 15 years of work, scheduled to meet with the LAPD commissioner the very next day to talk about protecting the community he loved. He was 33 years old, and in 33 years, he built more, gave more, created more, and invested more back into his community than most people accomplish in a full lifetime. He was not perfect. He never claimed to be, but he was real, and he was trying. Every single day, he was trying. The Marathon clothing store lives on through his brother's continued work and online sales. Nipsey Hussle Square stands at the corner of Crenshaw and Slauson. The neighborhood Nip Foundation continues to serve the youth of South LA. His children are growing up. His music is still being listened to every single day by millions of people around the world. The marathon continues. And the least we can do, for him, for his family, for his community, for ourselves, is keep running it. Thank you for spending this time with me today on Unseen Stories. This one was important. This one needed to be told the right way. If this story moved you, if it taught you something, if it reminded you of somebody you love or something you believe in, share it. Let somebody else hear it. Because that is how the marathon continues. One conversation at a time. Rest in power, Ermias. The marathon continues.